This is the Hofstra Radio Alumni Audio Yearbook, Volume 2, and today is February 10th, 2024. Please tell us your name and the years you were at Hofstra Radio.
Hi, I'm Andrew Coen, and I was on the WRHU from, I passed the training class in December of 99 and was on the station until March 31st of 2003, just over 3 months after I graduated in December of 2002.
Okay. Well, thank you for coming back and doing another interview. It's always a pleasure to talk to you, and I have to say, from the various dealings on Facebook as I post interviews and say happy birthday, and I constantly see your name reaching out to people and saying nice things and liking things, and you are such an active member of the Hofstra Radio community, even though you're not at the station anymore. You are still involved, and you reach out to so many people, and I have to say it's inspirational. And sometimes when I'm not getting any interviews or I'm kind of tired of doing things, I see you out there posting stuff and like, Andrew's still going. I'm going to book another interview. I'm going to keep going. So thank you for being such a supportive member and just a good friend to so many people.
Oh, well, thank you. And I'm glad I can play even a very small part in this amazing podcast that you've put together in terms of inspiring you to keep it going, because it's
Yeah.
been great.
It's sincere, because sometimes it's a lot of work. And before we started recording, we're talking about all the other responsibilities we have in life, and I'll see you or Mark Ernay or Mike Kluger or any number of people who consistently just reach out to people and are members of the community that really draw people together. So it's, like I said, it's absolutely sincere, and I greatly appreciate it.
Yeah, no, thank you. Yeah, no, it's as you've heard from the many people you've talked to, the station means a lot to many people, and it's great that this podcast can kind of capture that.
Thank you. All right, so let's get back to the questions. Let's talk about any positions or titles that you held as an upperclassman at the station.
So I never held any official titles. I was very active with the sports department, Hofstra's Morning Wake Up Call, and the Aggressive Edge heavy metal show. Um, Bruce actually did approach me at one point about maybe applying for an AB role, and at the time I was honest and upfront with him that I wasn't interested, and in retrospect, maybe I should have been more open to it. But at the time, I just didn't. I think I just didn't want the increased responsibility. But as I said in the first interview with you, I was very slow at the very beginning to get involved with the station,
Right.
slower than I should have been, and that was probably part of my thinking at the time. But overall, though, I even though I wasn't involved with any official titles, I'm very glad that I got as involved as I did at the very end of my time, WRH, which we'll get into later.
Yeah. I mean, you just said you had a lot of responsibility. You were doing a lot of different things. You just didn't have a title. And I wonder if, some people feel like, if I'm going to be sports director or airwave producer or whatever it is, that's the thing that I'm doing. And you seem to be working with many different people. Did that enter your thinking at all?
Yeah, I think at the time I looked at it like I don't want, it's going to mean more time, more meetings, more, so I was
Hmm.
probably looking at it more from that lens and not
Yeah.
thinking from it and not thinking of the positives in terms of, the social aspect. Obviously, those meetings, while they can be long, they can also be bonding. I'm sure, I've talked to people who are on the AB and EB, and they had sometimes sure the meetings got intense, but they would go out after. They would joke around, and so I did miss out on that. So I wasn't thinking that at the time, and and obviously just the experience that you can gain being in a managerial type role, which can serve you in any profession you work in.
Right. Now, did Bruce approach you with a specific position or an idea, or was it generally, I think you should be on the AB? And would that have been for your junior year, senior year?
This was No, he approached me in classic Bruce fashion. This was like I joined the station sophomore year, so
Hmm.
I took the training class my first semester sophomore year, and I was in. So this would have been probably like very early on, maybe spring semester sophomore year. So I was very new to the station at that point. He just, in classic Bruce fashion, he sees me walking on the hallway and he goes, "Oh, he calls me over and just says kind of out of the blue, like, "Oh, I think you'd be great for an AB role." I don't remember if he said any specific role, but he just said like, "Would you want to apply for that?" And I
Uh-huh.
at that moment, I said, to be honest, I think no, and I forget how I said it, but I politely declined.
Yeah. Oh, huh. That's interesting. I wonder if you had a little bit more time to think about it, because sometimes I know I've been offered things in my life in school and in work where it's like, hey, do you want to do this? And when you get caught off guard, it's like, I don't have time for that. And I wonder if you had a little bit more time to ruminate on it, to think about it, if it would have been different.
Yeah, I think part of it too being at that age, you're not thinking big picture. You're
Right.
thinking just in terms of your kind of your day to day and your classes and your other responsibilities. So but obviously, if that happened today, I would take a step back. I'd maybe say, ask for more information. But that comes with maturity.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. Well, thank you for sharing that. I mean, obviously, it didn't diminish your time with the station or the relationships that you've had since. It's just curious because some people I know that in my own recollection, it's like, well, weren't you this or didn't you do that job? I'm like, no, I was just around a lot. I just did a lot of this. So in the grand scheme of things, I think it's the people who show up day to day and pitch in when helped, that when needed. That's the important thing rather than the titles. But it's just curious that uh, someone who's so involved didn't have a position. But I want to go back to some of the programs and departments that you're working with, and maybe if you could talk about some of the people that you were working with. So you mentioned the sports department, mentioned the morning wake up call, and working with. I guess was it Whiplash at the time? I'm sorry, my brain just stopped working. Were you working on the metal show?
Yes, aggressive edge.
Aggressive Edge, right? Gosh, dating myself there a little bit. That was back in
Whiplash is a great Metallica song. So
yes, yeah. That was the original metal show that started in '92 or '93, and eventually became the Aggressive Edge. But if you don't mind, if you want to pick one of those areas or departments, who are some of the people that you worked with?
sure. Well, in the sports department, as I mentioned in the first podcast, I owe a lot of my involvement to getting to working with them to Ralph Benarchek and
Hmm.
Keith Irizarry, who led the sports department during my junior year, and that if it wasn't for them, I don't think I would have gotten in, joined the sports department. So I owe a lot to them. I also work closely in the sports department. Mike, some of the names that stick out: Mike Corbett, Jesse Ullman, Ray Alexander, Kevin Ingles, Stefano Fasulo, Alyssa Boyd, Jared Greenberg, who's obviously gone on to big things, Chris Karen, Josh Harmon, Nick Anastas, Nate Bortnick, Brandon Costa towards the end of my time there. I'm sure I left some people out.
Yeah, that's a
Oh,
good list.
Diana
Yeah.
Ingalls, I forgot her. She was also along with Brandon. Were towards the very end of my time there. And then Aggressive Edge was the producers during my time there were Tammy Bako and Paul Spania. And the morning show, which I was also very involved with. I I did a lot of shows with Sarah Hendricks, Angela Perdos, who was also the morning show producer for a lot of my time there. Mike DiPetrillo, John Winthrop, and also at the end of my time at WRHU, um, Ed Ingles gave me the opportunity to actually host some shows. I had done some co-hosting prior to that, but he let me host some shows at the very end. And my panelists, interestingly, I had already graduated December of '02. I was already older to begin with. So I was, had just turned 24, and all the panelists on the show were all freshmen.
Oh wow.
Jenny Beaudry, Brandon Costa, and Alicia Battinelli. So that was that was a fun experience as well.
Wow, that an impressive list of names as you're running through there. I'm like, yep, I know that name, I know that name. Interviewed that one, and so many people who are so important to the history of the station, and your recalls, pretty amazing. So thank you for sharing all those names, and I'm sure we'll double back with some stories about them as we go through our conversation. But I want to stop and take a moment and ask you to consider. I'm sure there are many stories, but when you talk about your time at WRHU, is there a story that you always tell that always comes to mind?
Yeah, well, there are many. There's certainly many, but one that does come to mind, and I think people who I know who are on the sports department especially appreciate this. There was um, early March 2003, which was just over 2 months after I graduated. But I was using that extra 3 months that was allowed. I was assigned to do play by play for a Hofstra women's basketball game at Towson with Nate Bortnick, and it was on a Sunday afternoon. The thing is, though, that neither one of us was very experienced at setting up broadcast equipment, and obviously that's a huge component of
Right.
doing any sports broadcast, but especially on the road. And so, needless to say, both of us were maybe a little uneasy about this. Not only driving 3 hours or so to the Baltimore area, but just knowing that we're going to face some challenges. When we get with but I will say, to Nate's credit, we got up at 5:30 a.m. To go there, and to just in anticipation, like we might run into issues. So
Right.
we might
Right.
want to give ourselves, I forget what time the game tipped off, probably noon or maybe one, but either way, we wanted to give ourselves plenty of time. And I have Kevin Ingles to thank a lot for this, because he was a whiz when it came to the technical stuff, and he was nice enough to, prior to this broadcast, he probably knew as well, like, all right, maybe, you know, you're not the best equipped for this, but he went, he took some time and went over some of the basics with me and kind of got me up to speed. And yeah, Nate and I were able to, we got there plenty, obviously we had plenty of time, and we were able to get everything in order, and game went off without any problems. And as far as the game itself, it was, it was not the best moment for Hofstra women's basketball. They actually went. There was a stretch of 15 minutes in the game in the first half where they went without a field goal,
Oh
um,
no.
which Nate, as a good color person should do, he noted that he spotted on the board in front of us that there was this long drought. So so that was a good job by him. And it was, even though Hofstra ended up getting blown out in the game, but I have good memories of that broadcast. It was some good calls, and Nate was a great color guy. And then after the game, we Nate lived in his dad lived in Maryland, so he met us, and we got some pizza after the game before we headed back to Long Island. So just a great memory all around.
Hmm. Yeah, there's so many of these sports department stories about road trips and overnights and long distance thing and I think a lot of us take it for granted that um, when we listen to a game or watch a game on TV that it's a relatively easy thing to pull off, that you sit down and you talk about a game and that's it. But there's so much that goes into it, and the preparation and all the pieces of advice and the things that you learn along the way. So yeah, as you were telling that story, I was thinking of stories from Marshall Hausfeld and Todd Ant and so many other people that went on the road and had these experiences. And I just talked to John Lane, and like there's so much that goes into producing these things. And thank you for sharing that, because it's like you said, the game itself, not memorable, but clearly the experience in doing it, that's the important part, and that's very cool.
Yeah,
So
and I forgot to mention also, as further context for this, maybe 5 weeks before this, I had done a game at Drexel with Josh Harmon,
Hmm.
and that game we weren't as lucky. The game actually never went on as it turned out. Like we ran into all kinds of technical issues, and the game never got on air.
Oh
Um,
no.
and I think in that case it was not Josh was very he was good with that stuff. So it wasn't like I don't think it was not anything on our end. I think it was something on Drexel's end perhaps, but
Yeah.
either way, we we went all the way there. I mean, not that Philadelphia's that far, but
No, but it's an effort to do that, and then knowing that this thing had happened before, and now there's another possibility. Yeah, I can see you being a little bit more nervous, having a little bit more trepidation beforehand. But you pulled it off, and that's a story that you always tell. Now, in thinking about this interview or preparing, do any stories come to mind that you rarely get a chance to share, or that you haven't thought of in a long time?
yeah, I mean, there's I'm sure there's something I'll think of like after we record, of course, but I would say one thing that I often forget about, but that was a great part of my memories of WRHU was we had a tradition where after the locker room, which we recorded on Sunday nights at 8 o'clock, we would watch The Sopranos, which
Right.
was a big show at the time,
Yeah.
and this was, pre-streaming and pre-DVR, so the show was on at 9 o'clock every Sunday night, and when it was on, and we would, that's when locker room would finish, and so we would all go into the conference room, right after and watch the show, and then because we always had our we called it kind of a post mortem that we would do
Right.
after
Right.
each show to kind of go over the good and the bad, and but we would always delay that till after Sopranos when Sopranos was going on. That shows you what a hit show it was.
Yep.
That
Yep.
we that was a priority. And but no, and we a lot of times we get food, and it was just that was there was a lot of things that I loved about that tradition of doing the locker room show on Sundays, but that was a big part of it, no doubt.
Yeah, yeah, that sounds like a good time, and certainly it's such a different world now. It's not that long ago, but it's certainly different. That it was. I think the phrase that comes to mind is appointment television. That you had to
Yes.
catch it when it was on, and especially, yeah, there might be repeats, but you want to be in on the conversation the next day because people would talk about, oh, did you see this or what happened?
Oh yeah.
The Sopranos was definitely something you want to be on top of. So that's the timing is so interesting and cool there.
Yeah, 100%. No doubt. It was uh, it's hard to explain to the younger generation
Those
what that
kids,
feeling
yeah.
was like when a show came on, and it wasn't just even and back then even Thursday network TV was
Yep.
big, when you had Seinfeld and Friends on Thursday nights, ER, like it's just it was a different world.
Yeah, yeah. I think NBC used that appointment television that you had to be there on Thursday night to hear that. But yeah, and likewise with the sports broadcasts and the radio stuff, unless you had a cassette deck ready to go or maybe a CD burner if you had that, if you missed it, it was gone. And it's such a different world now that everybody's streaming, everybody's got recordings, and you can just find something online. So that was it. Now I'm curious with the locker room that you guys have this tradition and something to look forward to right afterwards. Did any Sopranos storytelling make it into the locker room, or were you guys able to keep those worlds separate?
No, yeah, I don't think so. I'm trying to remember, but no, I think that was it never. I don't think it ever came up on air. Like, oh, we at the end of the show, like, oh, we got a couple minutes till the Sopranos starts. But I'm sure we were thinking that.
Ah, that's funny. That's funny. So obviously, the station became very important in your life, and you're involved in all these different things. Was there ever a moment or a time where you thought, "I'm not enjoying this," or "I want to do something else"? Did you ever think about stepping back from the station?
I didn't, but there was I as I said before, I think there was times at the beginning, especially where I was very slow to get going. I mean, I didn't get it. It's crazy to think about now. I didn't get announcing clear until you know basically 14 months into my after I join the station, from a
Right.
training class, which is it's just mind boggling to think about. But that's, I think a product of putting things off. And I also lived, I lived in Rhode Island, so I was not there in the summer.
Right.
So, and then so it was just a combination of things. But so I think maybe early on, I thought, that perhaps I was never gonna really do much on the station. I was just kind of do my slot and my engineering slot, and and that would be it. And thankfully, and again, I have Ralph Benarchuk and Keith Irizarry really to thank me for getting me to join the sports department, because that's what ignited my other
Mm.
involvements with the show and got me to get announcing cleared and combo cleared. And I initially, I mentioned this I think in the first podcast, my initial reluctance to join the sports department was because I love sports, but I loved it so much that I didn't want to miss going to Hofstra games or
Yeah.
experiencing as a fan. And luckily, we had some great teams back then. Men's basketball made the NCAA tournament twice. Lacrosse was made the quarterfinals twice. Football was very good then as well. And I wanted to go to as many games as I could as a fan. But luckily Ralph, he came up with ways where I could still do that. Where he said, well, you could come, you can be involved with the road broadcast. We could have you on Locker Room to talk about the wrestling team, because I was I was covering the wrestling team for the Chronicle. Actually, interestingly, that was, I don't think I mentioned this the first podcast. That was the first time I got on air. Was I wasn't even announcing cleared yet. It was in February of 2001, and
Mm-hmm.
he had me on as a guest, basically on the Chronicle, as a Chronicle reporter on the Locker Room, talking about the wrestling team, and that was my first time on air, was basically as a guest. And that spark, and then so that was the first step, and then the next step was, of course, getting that announcing cleared and doing some Locker Room shows. So it was like little incremental steps, but I have him to thank for that. And then Keith, in his role of sports director, he was in charge of doing morning show. Everyone on the sports department had to do morning show or Newsline or both.
Right.
And he basically kick my ass into gear and say, well, all right, you gotta start doing a morning show once a week, or you gotta start doing, new. So, and I started doing that. And then, so it's like one step after another. Next thing you know, you're very involved.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. And I'd like to think, I don't know how many people were working in the sports department at the time, but I know that there's always a competition for time and for games and for key roles and things like that. So there's always people who want those things, but Ralph and Keith saw something in you and kept encouraging you and saying, even though there's people who would gladly take that spot, I'm sure, they kept pushing you and encouraging you to get involved. I think that's really interesting. That's really neat that they saw something in you and kept on you to say, do this. We want you to do it.
Yeah, no, I mean, Ralph in particular, like I had some classes with him, so I spent a lot of time. And I think he, uh, it was a different time in the sense that, now, like, the sports department is massive, but
Yeah.
back then, actually, it's kind of surprising. It was not very big. It was not a very big sports staff. And so I think part of it, from Ralph's perspective, was, we need more people,
Okay.
to especially because the morning show and the Newsline slots, like, especially morning show. I love doing the morning show personally, but a lot of people didn't. They
Right.
didn't want to get up at bright and early to do 7 to 9. Basically, we all the sports guys who took part in the morning show. You would do your sports updates every half hour, but we would also participate in the show itself, and, whatever topics they were talking about. And usually it was not sports. But I like that. Because I like to, talking politics or talking, entertainment or other. So, so, so I was always glad to, like, volunteer. Like, if somebody didn't want to wake up super early, like, I'll take your morning show shift.
Wow.
And
There are people, it's not me, but there are people who don't mind getting up early for that kind of shift. So you were doing that like what, once a week, do a morning show, or maybe once a week do a Newsline?
Yes, yeah, once a week. I think I remember doing both. And But again, like I would also sometimes do it more than once. If somebody couldn't do it for some reason, or I was always glad to kind of step in, especially to help out because I enjoyed it.
Hmm. Um, I, I keep going back to this idea, but it was something that was important to me to be involved in many different things and work in different formats. Um, I kind of want to ask, like, well, what's your proudest moment in sports? What's your proudest moment here? But like, is there a proudest moment or biggest accomplishment about all the things that you did at Hofstra Radio?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to pinpoint one, but if I had to pick one though, I would say, and this kind of also, uh, if I had to also pick like kind of a defining event, it would kind of fall into the same bucket, but it would basically be election night 2002,
Hmm.
where I anchored the national desk um, updates with Emily Tweedy. And interestingly, also, I got into on the way to the station. I got into a minor car accident.
Oh no.
Uh, I was exiting onto Oak Street by the Nassau Suffolk dorms, if you can picture that, taking a
Hmm.
left, and didn't see one of the cars. And again, a minor, no injuries or anything, but the car was, very damaged, and it took a while to sort everything out in terms of, uh, the other party and everything. So, long story short, I got to the station, and maybe 20 minutes later, I was supposed to go on air for my first
Yikes.
update, and at that, I had to kind of scramble, but luckily, I had a pretty good grasp of what the key races were, nationally in the Senate and some governor races. So I was able to kind of put together kind of a very quick uh, update on the computer, print it out, and went in. The first update went off without a hitch, and then we kept doing updates throughout the night, and it ended up being a kind of a historic election in the sense that it was a rare time where the party in the White House gained seats. George W. Bush at the time and was the president, and the Republicans gained seats in the House and the Senate. They took over the Senate, and it was also historic for Hofstra in a sense because Norm Coleman, Hofstra
Hmm.
alum, he won the Minnesota Senate race against former Vice President Walter Mondale. So there was a lot of interesting dynamics in play that night. And yeah, if I had to pick one moment, that would probably, or in terms of accomplishment or defining moment. And one other actually that I'll mention also that I just thought of actually, but it was we I mentioned it before that I hosted morning show at the very end of my time on the station, and it turned out that the first morning show that I hosted was in mid March of 2003, and it happened to coincide with the U.S. invasion of Iraq,
Wow.
and so it was a tough balance because morning show, as it tends to be very fun and lighthearted, but I also we had this really developing very serious news story going on, so but my approach was that the first half hour of the show we would focus solely on Iraq and what was going on and be very serious, but then as the show went on we gradually kind of got into more lighthearted topics, and
Yeah.
I thought it went I mean I had great panelists which helped, but I think overall I was proud of how that show went, and I thought we struck a good balance.
Wow. So I think you mentioned earlier all the people that you were working with were freshmen. They would have
Yes.
been newly cleared people on the air with not a lot of background and experience, and you're the literal senior person, and they're following your lead. That must have been, was that nerve wracking, or did you just say this is what we're doing?
Yeah, I didn't really, I mean, to show you how impressive these three people were, like, I didn't even think of them as freshmen. They were so, like, even though they were, you know, barely out of the training class, you would never know it. They were
Yeah.
accomplished. And Jenny Beaudry, she was the co-host, and but I gave her like a lot of, she got a, she did like a whole, like, she was big into entertainment stuff. So she did like an entertainment update. So I got her involved a lot, which helped. And it was, but it was great. I mean, all three of them were great to work with. And I wish I had more than three shows with them. I mean, I had co-hosted, had been in the co-host role prior to that,
Right.
for the show. And Mike DiPietro was actually the host, but it was great to be able to be the host for those three shows. And it was good. I think it was good too to have those two perspectives from, people very young, just starting out college, to someone who had just graduated and was about to enter the professional world.
Right. Right. Now, if you don't mind me asking a little bit about the minutia of putting that show together. I'm thinking that in the studio, the on-air studio at the time, it would have been sort of not quite a horseshoe, but sort of a rounded table area. And there's a host, there's a co-host, there's a sports reporter and an entertainment reporter. Is that right?
Basically, yeah, we had, I would be behind the board,
Okay.
and then Jenny, the co-host, Jenny Beaudry, would be to my left.
Okay.
That was always where the co-host sat. And then I mean, to show you how long ago this was, there was a big desktop computer,
Uh-huh.
that was right next to the co-host. And the co-host, a big part of their job was they would check online to see, was there any stories that were developing, or any stories that might be good to mention. And so that would be the co-host kind of job. And then and then uh we had like a news person, which was Alicia, and Brandon Costa did the sports. And they would be sitting, to the, you know right, next to Jenny,
Yeah.
kind of in front of me. Um, and the show was 2 hours, 7 to 9, but honestly, it flew by. Like, it
Yeah.
was,
Yeah.
it was, the next thing you know, it was like you're already like, in the 8:30 hour, like that. But that's how fun it was.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm so interested in the behind the scenes that, sometimes if you're watching a band play on stage and they're kind of nodding and laughing to each other, I'm always like, what are they what is that language there? What are they saying to each other that you and I in the audience maybe don't notice, but they know there's a communication. And so you are running the board, you're hosting, you're paying attention to the news, you're making these executive decisions about what's going to go on the air. And just, how do you get that idea? Do you say 10 minutes before you go on, this is what I want to do? Or is this all in the moment where we're going to shift to this? How are you making these decisions?
Yeah, well, I would get there very early, and I would basically make bullet points for each half hour of the
Mm.
show. Like, these are the topics that we're gonna focus on. It was also, I think it was that same show, or it might have been the next week. Either way, it was around one of the shows that I hosted. Another story that developed was Elizabeth Smart,
Oh, yeah.
missing girl in, Utah, who a lot of people had presumed was dead, all of a sudden was found. So, like, for example, so I thought, all right, well, that's an interesting story, national story we can focus on, and a good news story, in the sense that she was found alive.
Hmm.
So we focused on that. And I would find topics. There was another topic, I think, that was, oh yeah, it was the same. It was around the time where, the Yes Network, which broadcast the Yankee games, there was a whole dispute with them and Cablevision.
Right.
And so we touched on that. There was another topic that was big at the time, which was, uh, smoking ban in restaurants that was
Mm-hmm.
implemented by Mayor Bloomberg. And again, another sign of the times, that back then it was not uncommon to go to a restaurant and you'd have a smoking section and a non-smoking section.
Right.
you
Right.
know and and when Mayor Bloomberg came up with the smoking ban, and later NASA, and later the New York State did, it was considered radical. But of course, now nobody would think anything of it. But that was another big topic that we touched on.
Wow. So
So yeah, I try to come up with good topics that would generate, discussion, back and forth.
Yeah, it sounds like you had a lot of autonomy in deciding these things. I wondered, was there any sort of mandate, or like we have to do this much local news or this much New York State news or this much national news, or was it up to you guys to decide?
Ed Ingles was the executive producer, and he listened in, and so, but so he would sometimes call in and maybe say, you should bring this up or whatever. But for the most part, he gave us complete autonomy,
Yeah,
to pick what we wanted for topics, and it was it, and I and it was I mean and that's the beauty of WRHU is that you do have that you know that freedom with some limits, of course, but you do have that freedom to be creative and kind of make some of those executive decisions.
yeah, yeah. It's really impressive. Thank you for getting into the weeds there. I do appreciate it. And I think a lot of other people will listen and go, yeah, yeah, I can see that or understand that and make relationships because we are, as students, as 19, 20-year olds in charge of a professional level radio station. We have to make these decisions. But you mentioned Ed Ingles, and I always like to take a moment and hear some stories about Ed. Were there pieces of advice he gave you before, like starting as co-host, or was it just generally day to day listening in and here's a little tidbit, here's a little something that you did well? What was your relationship with Ed like as far as that went?
Well, Ed was it's funny because Ed would always his big thing, whether it was a sports broadcast or whether it was doing morning show, give the time, give the
No,
give
yep.
give the give the show that you're listening to, because you never know, someone might just tune in like at that moment's notice, and they don't want to know. And it's funny because I always thought I was doing it, but clearly not enough, because Ed would always remind me. um, but he was great, and especially during those when I graduated in December of '02, and I took that extra 3 months. Like that is when I really worked with Ed a lot in terms of, he came up with great ideas for me to focus on in terms of um, packages for morning show or newsline or locker room, and because at that point I wasn't taking classes, so I had
Yeah.
more much more freedom to maybe tackle some of those, and it was, I give him credit because back then you had to if you wanted to host the morning show, you had to basically get cleared for it,
Yeah.
which I never did. But to Ed's credit, he and this was all him. He said, I think it'd be great if you could host some morning shows before your time is up, which was obviously going to be March 31st. So so I have him to thank for that, which I'm very grateful for. And Ed was the type who the great thing about him is he, even when things went bad, I mean, there were plenty of times where I had a bad news line update, you know, or slipped up on something, but he never like, it was never like negative with him. It was always like, what can we do better?
Yeah.
He always approached it with in a very positive manner, no matter how bad it was. And he just had that way about him. And on honestly, I mean, I'm very grateful to have worked with Ed, but I wish I like a lot of things, I wish I'd done more with him even.
Yeah, yeah, I know he was so important to so many people and to the station in general, and those things that you mentioned are things that so many people mention, and that positivity and that support and the focus on the details and the preparation, and those are not just radio station lessons; they're life lessons. That's how you do any job. It doesn't matter if you go into radio or TV. Anything that you do, you have to, if you want to be successful, you do those things, and it's clear that those lessons translated to you and to so many others. So thank you for sharing that. I love hearing stories about the man. I didn't know him, but I love hearing stories, so thank you.
Oh yeah, no, my pleasure, and I'm very grateful that he was there during my time
Yeah,
on the
yeah.
station.
On a lighthearted side, are there stories that always make you laugh, or are there moments where you can't help but chuckle or laugh? Like what were some of the funny things that happened during your time at the station?
Oh, there were many. I mean, especially on the screw up side. But I mentioned, on the first episode, I mentioned, I think I mentioned the first time I did an engineering slot, which there was a lot of mistakes made. You know, I think I made like a whole year's worth of mistakes in those 2 hours doing engineering and aggressive edge. But then I guess if I had to pick like a funniest one, it was probably um, this would have been in winter of 2000. It's probably February of 2000 because I graduate. I finished the training class in December of '99. Went home, to Rhode Island for winter break, and then came back. And the engineering slot that I had back then was um, it was a show called The Parents Journal that was on Saturday mornings at
Uh-huh.
7 a.m. It was The Parents Journal, and then there was another show, and I don't remember the name of it. It was like both of them were hour shows. Um, but Parents Journal aired from 7 to 8, so that was the first show, and
Were you live
I
engineering or was that tape?
it was taped,
Okay.
but back then the station was not 24 hours. It
Right.
was, it signed off at 3 a.m. and then it signed back on. Well, during the week it was 5 a.m., but during Saturdays and Sundays it was 7 a.m.
Uh-huh.
And so doing this slot, I had to sign on the station. And I get there and I think, I'm following all the steps and I think I've got everything in order, and I, press the tape, and I, I think everything's fine. And then I go out into the hallway. Now, anyone who's been to WRHU kind of knows that you can usually hear the station. They have like some speakers, and so you can hear what's going on air.
Uh-huh.
And I went out to the hallway, and maybe, I don't know, 5-10 minutes into what I thought was the show, and I didn't hear anything, but I guess I didn't think anything of it. I thought, oh, I don't know, maybe it's not on, maybe it's not turned on or whatever.
Right.
And luckily, Ray Alexander happened to show up to the station. He was doing a basketball broadcast that day, so he was there early, and, and he noticed there was nothing coming up. There was nothing on the air,
Yeah.
and, and he went in and he fixed whatever the problem was. I don't remember what the step I missed was, but I think it was something simple. And he went on, he went on the air and he said, did the legal ID and said, we now join the Parents Journal, already in progress. And
Perfect. Perfect.
and,
Yeah.
and so, but it was, meanwhile, like we had like probably, I don't know how long it was. It probably was at least a half hour of nothing. like,
Yeah. Oh gosh. Oh yeah, that is my perpetual stress dream. Whenever I'm stressed out about anything, and it makes its way into my subconscious, if I wake up, it's the stress dream of running down the hall in the basement of Memorial Hall to the on-air studio, because we're supposed to be on the air and there's nothing going out, and the CD player won't work or whatever it is. That is the perpetual thing. So it's literally the stuff of nightmares. But I'm glad you can laugh about it. I'm glad it's a chuckle to remember, and rather than something stressful.
yeah, and thank God Ray showed up when he did.
Yeah, yeah. It's you certainly weren't the only one. There were many people who struggled through that, and I'm sure we could spend hours recounting things like that. But thank you for sharing that. I have a hypothetical question for you. If you were
Yep.
to get a call from John Mullen or Kathleen Shortis or someone at the station, so we need someone to come in and be on the air. First question is, would you do it? Second question is, if you had your choice of show, what kind of show would you want to do?
Oh boy. Well, the first question, 1,000%, I would do it.
Yeah.
And no matter what the show was, honestly, because there was just something about being in that station, or being in the studio. It never felt laborious. It was just, it's hard to describe, but just it, no matter how many hours I spent there, it always brought some happiness. So I would definitely do any show that they wanted. And if I had to pick one though, that's a tough one. I mean, certainly music wise, it would be um, the Aggressive Edge. I
Yeah.
mean, they do air it very late now, but I would, you know, if
It's different when you're 20 and then when you're a little closer
yeah,
to yeah.
yeah, I mean, it was 11-1 when I was on the station. I think it's 1-3 now, but um, music wise, that would align with me. Rock and Roll Oasis too. I did fill in for the Rock and Roll Oasis from time to time, so it would be one of those two shows if I had to pick a music show.
Okay.
Um, Other than that, I certainly obviously sports. I mean, I'm always glad to talk sports in general, but especially Hofstra sports. Um, you know, Morning show, I don't know. I loved doing morning show back then. Morning show might be a little trickier just because it's just back then I loved talking politics. Not as much now. Been it's
Yeah.
been a crazy decade or so. So I might want to avoid those topics, but but other topics, yes, it would be great. But in general, though, no, I would go back to the station in a heartbeat to help out with the show if they ever needed.
No. I think you kind of alluded to this, but the next question is, what do you miss most about your time at the station?
Well, definitely the people,
Mm.
and and I alluded to it earlier, but our Sunday tradition of for the locker room show, meeting in the afternoon to prepare, and Jared Greenberg did a great job when he became locker room producer. He really made it like a team activity where even if you weren't gonna be a panelist on the show, there was other ways you could contribute. What you might be doing, you might do updates during the show. You might come on for a quick a segment, on, tracking. We called it the Dutch drill at the
Uh-huh.
time, where we would update like what former Hofstra players or coaches are up to. So he got a lot of people involved, even if they weren't one of the main panelists, and even if you weren't on air, you could help out behind the scenes, put together. We called them quick sheets, where to kind of prepare like the host for whatever whatever team we were going to talk about or whatever game we were going to talk about. It was just a great experience. I mean, that's just one example of the enjoyment I got, being on the station. And then, like I said, we would often after like watch The Sopranos, or we would, maybe get food. It was
Yeah.
just spending time at the station. Just even the off-air stuff was great. I also miss another show. I don't know if they still do it, but back then, Anarchy
Yep.
is the Sunday night show that they had. Um, Very late. I think it was 11-1, and you could play any kind of music you wanted. And I mean, if you were really ambitious, you could do a classic. You could do a jazz song followed by a metal song. I mean, I never did that, but I tended to stick to classic heavy metal and hard rock. But that was always fun, and I would Scott Mason, he was a rock and roll Oasis producer.
Right.
He would come on with me sometimes. Mike Bernstein was another. Uh, he also he's another name I forgot about, who also was involved with morning show with me. He would sometimes pop on because he'd be in the station anyway, and he come on for a mic break. So that was always fun as well. But just there were so many great people at the station, and just great memories all around.
Hmm. Hmm. If you could time travel, go back for 60 seconds and talk to a younger version of yourself at the beginning of your Hofstra experience, is there any advice you would give yourself?
Oh, no question, it would be to get involved with the station much quicker than I did. I mean, I'm glad that I kind of made up for lost time towards the end, but whenever I talk to current students, I always tell them to that they don't get this time back, and
Yeah.
that they should take advantage as best they can at the amazing opportunities in front of them. I mean, WRHU and Hofstra in general is is great in the sense that you can, a lot of colleges you have, some colleges you have like they might have a college radio station, but it's basically anybody can join it. It's not like a real
Right.
serious thing.
Yep.
Then you have other schools where they have a great radio station, but a lot of it's professionals, and you might not get, on air until your junior year, if that. But WRHU, you can, the world is your oyster. You can, if you work hard, you can get on air right away, you freshman year, and have 4 years of just tremendous professional opportunities, and just leadership opportunities if you choose so. It's just um, this it's the facilities there are they were I mean they were top notch when I was there, and
Right.
now they're really top notch. And
Yeah.
so I just try to urge the students when I do talk to them to just take advantage as best you can. The time, it goes quick, and so yes, no question, that is the advice I would give myself back then.
Absolutely good advice. So many of the things that you talked about today and in our previous conversation, they are clearly things that have stuck with you, and the things that you learned from Ed and from Bruce and from so many people, the preparation, the saying yes to things, being involved in going to so many games, and just taking the opportunities, that comes through in your stories, and the perseverance. Um, are there particular skills or other ideas that you've carried through with you and into your adult life and your professional career you wouldn't mind sharing?
Sure. Well, I think early on, at WRHU with Bruce's leadership, I think I learned, while there were endless opportunities available, that you had to earn those opportunities. It wasn't going to be handed to you. I think the training class set the tone for that. And not just that, but the steps required after, to get announcing cleared, to get, combo cleared. And I think that was great in the sense of, just, I think, preparing for the professional world, that, no matter what job you go to, nothing's going to be handed to you. You've got to work for it. And the sports department was really the epitome of that,
Yeah.
because people, there was it was a much smaller sports department back then, but there was still, we at the same time, we broadcasted less games. Like now they do, field
Everything.
hockey,
Yeah.
men's soccer, women's soccer. Back then, the only fall sport we did was football. The only winter sports we did was men's and women's basketball. We didn't do wrestling back then. Spring sports we did do more: lacrosse, softball, baseball. But either way, there was less, limited opportunities for a lot of these games, and the ones who worked hard were the ones who got rewarded. And so I think that sent, a strong message, I think, for any whatever career you do.
Right.
And I also, I learned the importance of preparation and professionalism, certainly under Ed, but others as well, which is vital for any job. I now work in print. I've been working in print journalism since I graduated. I'm currently a finance reporter for Commercial Observer. I cover commercial real estate industry. Most of my work involves writing, but I also will occasionally take part in some of our podcasts. So it's great to be able to utilize some of those skills from WRHU in the job. But I would say preparation and professionalism. Those two words, I think, are the main things that I learned from WRHU that I carried with me today.
Hmm. Hmm. And I think an unspoken thing throughout in all these stories is passion, and having interest, and being open minded. Again, that seems to be a through line throughout your stories and your experience, is that when you got an opportunity, you took that opportunity and you tried it, and you asked questions and you learned things, and I think that comes through, in your storytelling, and hopefully in the rest of your career, that you find something you care about, and you follow through, and you do something with it. And that's not everybody does that, and it's clear that that's something, whether it was spoken or unspoken, that's definitely there in your stories.
Oh, thank you. Yes, and I guess that we got the three P's. We got preparation, professionalism, and passion. I think that sums up WRHU to a T.
There you go. All right, I like it. And I meant to make mention of this before, but it got kind of lost in the conversation. But you mentioned that as an undergraduate, you want to make sure to go to as many games as possible and see all the teams. And you still do that. You still go to games.
Oh
You're
yeah.
still a Hofstra sports fan, which is great, which is amazing.
Oh yes, no doubt. And it's not just the the big sports. It's I go to anyone who knows me. I'm women's soccer, men's soccer, women's lacrosse. I'm actually going to a women's lacrosse game today.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
after this interview, yeah. So yeah no I'm into many Hofstra sports teams and it's and just to bring it back to WRHU real quick, I think that's a great thing about another great one of the many great things about WRHU is that the students who want to do the sports, they have a chance to be the main coverage of the division of these Division 1 teams, and
Yeah.
that's not the case at most schools. It's they'll have a professional who does it, and maybe you do like the secondary broadcast, but WRHU, you are for the most part not the main broadcast, and there's so many great teams to cover, that have made big runs, men's and women's soccer in particular in the last couple years. So I yeah no I love it, and I often connect with WRHU people at these games. In fact, actually, this past December, a bunch of WRHU alums went down to Duke when Hofstra basketball played at Duke. Men's basketball played at Duke, and to
Yeah.
experience Cameron Indoor Stadium, and that was a great experience.
Could you talk about that, about what it's like to be in a stadium like that?
Oh yeah, well, it definitely lived. It certainly more than lived up to the hype. I mean, it was, uh, this was everyone always hears about the Cameron Crazies, and
Yeah.
yes, they were out in the fourth, and this was a game against Hofstra. Imagine if it was a game against UNC or an ACC, another ACC team. Like, yeah, but this was a game against Hofstra in December, and it was still packed, and the students were very engaged. And the great thing about this trip too is, in addition to the game, we got to go. Todd Ant was actually there as well, and a bunch of us were able to go in to the arena for the Hofstra walkthrough practice.
Wow.
Um, and I should also point out John Danowski, the former Hofstra men's lacrosse coach, who was also he was also on WRHU at the end of his time there. He
Right.
he greeted us, and he actually was he helped us get into the practice. Some of us, because it was mostly just donors there, but we were able to get in there and experience the walkthrough, and then go on the court after, and amazing memories.
Wow. Wow, that's so cool. And the names that you mentioned there, and Todd Ant, I mean, just all around great guy and Hall of Famer. And wow, that's what a great trip. That's amazing. Thank
Yeah.
you for sharing that.
Yes. Oh yeah. No doubt. It was a lot of WRHU bonding on that trip, to say the least. And some people who lived in North Carolina area from WRHU, like Pete McCarthy and Christian Heimel, you know, they joined us for the game, and we went out after. So it was a great day.
Wow. Very cool. Andrew, this whole experience has been wonderful. Thank you for sharing your stories and your time, and thank you for being such a passionate and prominent member of the Hofstra Radio community. It's great seeing your posts and your comments online, and at all the alumni events and station events. Thank you so much. This has been absolutely wonderful. Thank you.
No, and thank you, Brian, for continuing this project, and I very much enjoy listening to these episodes.